future. The translators represented a full cross-section of Jacobean England, or at least that part of it where court, politics, church and scholarship all met. But they were a pretty motley crew. Chief among the translators was a bishop and establishment man, Lancelot Andrewes. He was a brilliant linguist, remembered also for his ruthless pursuit of Puritan radicals. Oh yes, and he blew £3,000 on an extravagant party for his benefactor, the king. There were some cynical court politicians among them, like Henry Savile, who made a huge fortune for himself milking colleges in Oxford and at Eton, or James Montague, editor of the King's Collected Works and an obsequious, flattering man. There were adventurers like John Layfield, who'd been on a wild buccaneering trip to the Caribbean where he'd fought the Spanish and may well have been the first Englishman to have eaten a pineapple. Or there were fierce preachers like George Abbott, who once arrested an entire church full of students because they hadn't taken their hats off when he came in. And there was a drunk, Richard Dutch Thompson, who it was said never went to bed one night sober, and was translating the fabulously obscene epigrams of the Latin poet Martial while doing Exodus in the daytime. For me, one of the reasons the King James Bible is so great is that its translators were not genial, cloistered clergymen in their grey V-necks. They were fully engaged with the whole width and depth of their world. And perhaps that is why the King James Bible is so good, because its translators were not. But it was important that another sort of translator was also involved. Puritans needed to be central to the process, because with them on board, no Puritan could claim that this was not his Bible. Sam Ward taught here at Sidney Sussex College in Cambridge. He was a very different type of translator, but an equally complex character. We're lucky that his crabbed, personal diary has survived. It reveals the very troubled mind of a Puritan.
The problems could be major or minor. Among the minor problems he felt he faced in his own life, being godly, was his overindulgence in eating. There's a rather marvellous entry where he talks about also my intemperance in eating too many plums.
And sometimes it got rather worse than that?
It could get worse. There are a few references to what he calls often adulterous dreams. And there's one particular entry when he refers to, oh, the grievous sins in T College, which was Trinity College, in which a woman was carried from chamber to chamber in the night time. And then he goes on, and this is very personal, of course, my adulterous dream that night.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's like a form of moral rigour, not allowing the sloppiness of one's life to go by unseen, but to make everything known.
Yes, there's a bringing to the surface. One might almost refer to psychoanalysis, in which everything has to be brought up.
If you start here, then you're going to be acutely interested in absolute clarity of understanding, in making sure you really know what you're dealing with, that in fact you couldn't think of a better training for a translator than this.
Yes, and it begins at the level of the extremely personal, by attending so precisely, almost like a detective, to every moment. You are probably getting as close as a human being can to some notion of the holy and the true.
For me, the essence of the King James Bible lies precisely in the coming together of these two mentalities. The enriched, supremely well-stocked mind of people like Lancelot Andrewes, and the clarifying, rigorous light of Puritanism, the fusing of the two wings of the Church of England. Considered like this, it would have been inconceivable that the project should have been put in the hands of any one individual. The only mind that could have produced the King James Bible was the mind of England itself. So what exactly did it achieve? Why is the King James Bible so great? Then took he him up in his arms, and blessed God, and said, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. A famous verse of the King James Version, full of its simplicity and dignity. And compare that to this rather wordy 18th century version. O God, thy promise to me is amply fulfilled. I now quit the post of human life with satisfaction and joy. There are many reasons why the King James translation is so good, but I believe one of them is undoubtedly James himself. The traditional view of James is of a lustful, extravagant, weak Scotsman, addicted to the divine and absolute right of kings. But he had great virtues too, particularly in his early years on the English throne. James was a very clever man. He's the only person ever to have sat on the English throne who had his works collected in a single handsome volume. And that's him up there giving them to the University of Oxford. Intellectual, highly articulate, obsessed with language, this rare coming together of wordiness and monarchy created the perfect conditions for a great and kingly translation of the Bible. There's no doubt this Bible was a political project, but it was much more than that. James encouraged rigorous scholarship. This is the library at Merton College, Oxford, where one of the translators, Henry Saville, worked. What I'm struck by is the thoroughness of these 17th century scholars. Now this, I think, is a grammar of Hebrew.
What you've done for me very helpfully, actually, is set this book down the wrong way. Even in the period, it was called the left-hand book, because you need to turn it that way and work for us, as it were, from back to front and from right to left when reading what is, in this case, a grammar of the Syriac or Chaldean Semitic language. And it's a grammar that would simply help scholars like Saville and the other translators understand those early Hebrew witnesses.
How good were they at it? I mean, how good was Saville's scholarship, say? Can one see anything?
This, in fact, if I could show you, is a very good example of some of the best evidence we have that Saville actually knew what he was reading, because you can see him making Hebrew or Chaldee, to be strict about it, annotations in the margin. So that really does show us that many of these men were, for the standards of their day, very much up to speed with Oriental languages, as they called them.
I don't think I've ever seen any evidence that is clearer than this of how careful they were. It is not a casual political project, this. This is a deeply scholarly enterprise.
Absolutely. And it's the common denominator that actually helps to create the umbrella under which James assembled a rather diverse group of people in terms of church politics.
There was a very good reason why the translators should be obsessed by precision. Their task was to transmit into English what they considered to be divinely inspired, the Word of God, and you couldn't be cavalier with that. Total fidelity to the original, total transmission to the people. That was the mountain they were faced with. Nearly all the documents recording their discussions have disappeared, but in the 20th century, a special copy of the Bishop's Bible, the principal text used by the translators, was found in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where it had been lurking, unnoticed, for centuries. It contained notes made as they worked on improving the meaning of specific passages. I looked at a famous verse from the book of Luke, which tells the story of Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist.
The original text, the printed text, says Elizabeth's time came that she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son.
And what do they do to it? How do they enrich that?
Well, whereas Elizabeth's is the first word in the Bishop's Bible, the word now is placed in the margin. So it becomes now Elizabeth's time came.
And where does now come from?
Well, it's one of those words that exists in Greek that means that the action is moving on. Normally, it's not translated because English isn't a language in which you have to keep saying and next and next and after that.
But by saying now, we do get this sort of sudden surge of vitality.
Absolutely, and that meaning is rooted in the Greek text. It's both more faithful and it gives the sense of drama that you articulate in the way you read the phrase.
So now we have time came crossed out, and he's replaced it, well, with two things there.
Yes, now the first time it's replaced with was fulfilled.
And what was wrong with that?
Well, nothing was wrong with it. Much is right with it. In the Greek word pletho, as in plethora, means filled. So it's an improvement on the original text in terms of faithfulness to the Greek.
But they've rejected was fulfilled and replaced it with full time came.
It's a wonderful phrase. And that notion of full time is a phrase invented by these translators and is actually a literal translation because the Greek says full time.
But it's also a very brilliant metaphorical thing, that it's the time of her fullness, her pregnancy, and the time of her fulfillment as the mother of John the Baptist. There is a kind of multiplicity packed in there, but without any strain. There's no straining of the language.
Absolutely. So the words flow, which is what you need when you're reading it aloud, and the density of meaning is true to the Greek. What more could you ask of a translation?
Nothing is more important in this 17th century world than getting the words of the Bible right. And the translators address that partly through the seriousness of their scholarship and partly through the absolute clarity of the language they use, something vital for the Puritan wing of the church. But for me, there's a third element, the thing that makes the Bible sing in these translators' hands, and that is the close and vivid attention they pay to the way the words sound. It's possible to see firsthand just how much importance they placed on this aspect of the translation. A copy of some notes taken during the final revision stage has survived. It's held by Corpus Christi College in Oxford. This is the president's lodgings in the college. And it's one of the very few rooms in England where we know for sure that the translation actually happened. One of the committees met here. Now, the Bible that they were planning to make here was something that had to be read in church every Sunday, something which would reach the people through their ears. The ear is the key organ in this whole story. And so when it came to that final revising committee, the way in which the editors worked was someone would read out the suggestion and others sitting around would listen to it, and if it didn't work for the ear, then it didn't work for them. And there is one particular moment in these notes made by one of the scholars, John Boyes, which sings out to me. There's a word in there which absolutely radiates, something that reveals a central quality of the King James Bible. The verse they're working on says, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. But one of the scholars objects, and he says it should say, yesterday and today, the same and forever. A slight tinkering with the word order, no more than that. But the interesting thing is his justification for it. And he's talking in Latin, because that's how scholars spoke to each other then. And he says, si hoc modo verba collocentor, if the words are arranged in this way, And then he goes into a mixture of Greek and Latin. Semnoteros erit ho logos. The sentence will be more majestic.